Okay, in this video we're going to work through how to bring SketchUp data into FormIt and use it as a way of doing a kind of pre-flight into Revit to check all the aspects of the model before we bring it into Revit to make sure that it's nice, watertight, and BIM ready. So to do this, we're going to look at a file that I kind of randomly grabbed off of the SketchUp warehouse. This house file. So if you want to go ahead, the link will be in the description. You can go ahead and download this to follow along. So the first thing I'm going to do is import. So let's look at what we got with this file. So the first thing you'll notice is materials did translate into FormIt. And you also got any layers that came through. And all of the groups as well, or components, in SketchUp came through. So if you go to the groups tree, which is where you can kind of think of it like the SketchUp outliner, you'll see this through this top level group. Here is group 25. And I can go through and I can select all these different groups. And this is going to be really useful for inspecting this file and getting it ready to prep to bring into Revit. So the first thing we want to talk about is segmenting the model so that you're not bringing in all of this detail into Revit all at once. So the first and most obvious amount of detail is all the furniture. So what we're going to do is isolate that onto a layer and then export it as a separate file. Now there's a couple ways we could do that. We can use layers. And you'll notice, there's actually a furniture layer here. So if I turn that on and off, let's see what happens. Actually, looks like only one little thing. Those lights are on the furniture layer. The rest are all handled by these layers. And it looks like probably these came from other imports into this file. Okay, so that's not really going to work that well. And actually, if you look at layer 0 here, the whole thing, as typical with a lot of SketchUp files, everything's on layer 0. So this isn't really terribly useful for us. So what's probably better is to actually look at the groups. So like I said, we've got one top level group and then a bunch of subgroups. And just to reiterate, in FormIt you have just the concept of a group. Groups have parent-child relationships like components do in SketchUp, but we just have one structure called group, and that encompasses grouping and components. So for the purposes of this exercise, what we actually want to do is flatten this file as much as possible, but not actually down to no groups. We just want to get it flat, and we'll talk about why that is in a minute. But the first thing we want to do is actually ungroup this top level group. So I'm going to right-click and choose ungroup. Now you have ungroup all, which would actually flatten the entire file, get rid of all groups. We don't want to do that. We just want to go level by level here. Okay, so now we've got these 4 groups, and it looks like it's furniture. So let's rename this. Just gonna do rename group and start naming these groups just to make them a little bit easier to find and organize. Okay, and then you can kind of see we can go in and organize this and rename all this if we wanted to, but we're not going to do that for this purposes. But you see how useful the groups tree would be for sort of organizing your file. And the better you name your groups, the more clear they will be as Revit families when you bring them into Revit. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we're going to select, it looks like all the furniture is on one group, which is great. So I'm going to do a couple things just to demonstrate here. The first thing is show you the H key. So if I right click in here and say edit group, I'm now in group edit mode for just that furniture. And if I press H, now it hides everything but the group I'm currently editing. That's fantastic. The other thing I want to show you is with the furniture selected, I can actually change its category to furniture. So there's a limited set of categories that you can change groups into in FormIt, and this will tell Revit as it converts them what family or what category to make them. Now you'll notice we don't see walls and floors and system families, but we'll show how we're going to actually bring that in to Revit. So for now, it's mostly freestanding categories plus generic model. We're just going to call it furniture. That way these will actually get converted into the furniture category, which could actually help for scheduling and quantifying what we're bringing in. Now let's actually select this. We're going to do a couple other things. First, we're actually going to put these, instead of on layer 0, we're actually going to put them on the furniture layer. And we're going to go ahead and just delete layer 0. It's just really not useful for us to have a layer with everything on it. It's kind of redundant. Okay, so now we can turn on and off that furniture. If I go back to the groups tree, and you'll notice that since I can't select through geometry, such as these windows, the groups tree is really nice for selecting things. So I'm going to select this. Next thing I'm going to do is actually export, and this is a really nice feature for segmenting the model. I'm going to export locally, and I'm going to say AXM, which is the FormIt file format, selected only. So this is just the selected groups, and I'm going to export those to a file called furniture. This will allow me to bring in just the furniture later. Now I'm going to go and just turn off that layer just so I don't have to see those. Okay, so now we're starting to kind of clean up the file and also start to organize it so that it make it easier to bring in. Okay, so the next thing we want to look at is the topic of water tightness. So I'll show you a nice little trick. I'm going to double click to edit this group. And I'm going to use the shortcut DW. And I can show you where that is in the UI under Visual Styles. And under this Model Diagnostics, identify watertight issues. So what that does is highlight any surface or the edges of any surface that isn't part of a watertight body or a piece of geometry. And you'll notice actually there's quite a bit of red lines. And that is pretty typical because of the way SketchUp allows you to model very quickly, which is good, but also allows you to model in a very non-watertight way. And so what does that mean? Now, these faces actually will come into Revit, but they'll be very hard to deal with. It's just really best to try to make these as watertight as possible. Now, you could go through and actually start to fix these using 3D, kind of classic 3D sketching commands. There's even a command here called cover, which allows you to select a bunch of edges and it will seal up them for you. But we're not going to go through and clean up this whole model. I just wanted to show you kind of what you're dealing with. And it's a classic case of garbage in, garbage out. You're not going to be able to work with this model unless you put a little work into it. Now we're going to work with the floors to get them in a state where we can bring them into Revit. So I'm in this group and I'm going to go into the subgroup here. And you'll notice this floor is just one big flat plane. So to be able to apply levels to this floor to get its area and also to apply mass floors to it inside Revit, it has to be at its top level. It can't be a subgroup. So what I'm going to do is actually Control X, go back out to the top of the project, and then do Edit, Paste in Place. Now with it still selected, I'm going to press G. Now you'll see Group 83. Go in and edit that. And I can rename it. I'm going to call this Floor 1B. And bring that up 6 inches. We have this nice floor object. Okay, I've gone ahead and prepared the rest of this model. So let's see what we have. If if I look at the levels, we have levels for all the proper heights in this model. And then if I click on each of these floors and go to properties, you'll see I have level 1B clicked for this floor, and then I have level 1A, which is slightly lower for this floor. And when we bring this into Revit, all of these levels will come in at the proper heights with the proper names. So let's look at these layers. Kind of stairs, floor 1 windows, floor 1 walls, and I can kind of build this up as we go. Okay, so now I'm pretty much ready to bring this into Revit as it is. Done some cleanup on the geometry and some of the watertight issues, but if you look, I'll do DW again. Obviously I haven't fixed them all, so, but that's okay, we're going to proceed anyway. I'm going to turn off the windows, and everything else I'm just going to export visible only, and we'll just call this house.axm. Alright, now we'll switch over to Revit. I'm going to start an architectural blank template. Going to go to the add-ins tab and then import the AXM file. Okay, I did pause the video because that can take some time, and the reason is that instead of doing a straight geometry import, the FormIt converter is actually going through each object, each group inside the model and creating an individual family. So that can take some time as Revit processes each one of those. Okay, so let's look at what we have here. I'm going to go to a 3D view and turn on mask category and go to realistic view. Alright, great. So that we have this nicely built up segmented model with all the materials applied. And also you'll notice we see the levels here in, this is really nice in Revit 2019. We have the levels in 3D, which is very, very useful. Okay, so let's look at these now. Now I can kind of start to isolate the model. Now one of the things I first notice is that this material is rotated improperly. Now if that does happen, we can go to the, and this is because sometimes the rotation of materials from SketchUp is not handled properly, so we can actually fix that. We go to materials, and we'll see here all the FormIt materials come through, and they get created as actual Revit materials, and they're appended with the word FormIt, so we can do search for all of them. And I actually know that this material is this crazy named one here. But if I go into the texture image area and edit it, I can now rotate this. Excellent. Now that wood is rotated. Let's isolate this. Okay, so here's our walls. Now you see, even though these were not watertight, they did come through with the materials applied. So we have two options here. We can do, to apply real walls to these, we can actually do a wall by face command and go through and actually select individual walls. And that's very useful, but these walls are now associated with this mass. And if you don't want to do that, another option is we can actually create actual just freestanding Revit walls using a little Dynamo script that I created. And it's very simple. It just selects the face of the mass and then creates the walls at the selected levels. And I even have this as a little Dynamo player script. So we don't even have to open Dynamo. I can just say create walls. So here I can select the face and then choose the starting level, wall type, and end level, and then play that. And then boom, I've got that wall. Now obviously it's not exactly matching up, so I can go in through there and edit this now. And the nice thing about this is it's now not constrained to the underlying massing object. So this kind of depends on how you want to proceed with the rest of the model. So you have these choices. You can use Dynamo to create these walls as you select them, or you can use the wall by face command. And then you can also go in and edit the type. And now that we have the materials that have transferred over from the FormIt model, we can actually go in and edit structure, and we can actually even use some of the FormIt materials that came through. So now these have the same material. So I can go in through and, I can change the type of this. So now it's just a Revit wall, so I can actually go through and make this match up better with what I was actually trying to do here. We can do the same thing with the floor objects as well. And if you look at the files I have in the link, you'll see that there's a separate Dynamo script for creating floor objects by face, or you can use the floor by face command inside the Massing and Site tab. And then the last thing I want to show is you can actually import geometry from FormIt into Revit family. So in this case I have a window family, and we've imported some of those windows from that SketchUp file into this family and created a couple types. So now if I load this into the project, I can actually place these windows, and they're actually cutting the geometry. So there's a whole other video where we went through how to do this workflow, and I will post a link to that in the description. So as you can see, you don't get something for nothing. You do have to do some work to get SketchUp data into Revit via FormIt. But as you can see, FormIt acts as a really great pre-flight tool to segment, inspect, and clean up your model before you bring everything into Revit. So I hope this was helpful, and please see us on our forum and keep the questions and comments coming. Thanks.